epiblast or ectoderm also gives rise to the mesoderm. So if you look right here, here's the epiblast, which is at some point considered the ectoderm. Cells flow through that primitive strait to give rise to the mesoderm. And then some of those cells will replace the hypoblast and become the endoderm. So I won't ask you what develops from the hypoblast other than the yolk sac. I will ask you what develops from the endoderm. You don't have to worry about, well, where are we and all of that. And you have a list of those structures in your lecture notes. So now we have, here's our embryonic disc again. This would be the cut surface of the amnion. All right. Here would be the 3 layers of tissue. Here's the amniotic sac. Here's the yolk sac. Here's that's still formed of hypoblast, but here's our endoderm. And then the mesoderm here is starting to form muscle-type structures. But we haven't folded yet. We haven't done that folding to create the wall structure, cross-section, the transverse section of the body that you're comfortable with, that you can say, oh, now I finally see something that's recognizable. We're starting to do that here, all right? So some of this mesoderm starts to move out and be associated with the ectoderm and a little bit with the amnion. It splits. And some of this starts to be more associated with the yolk sac and endoderm. This becomes somatic muscle, body wall muscle, skeletal muscle. This becomes smooth muscle. And it's really cool how it splits like that. One becomes body wall and one becomes organ wall. So let's look at the next image. Down here. So here is this is going to fuse and form the central canal of the spinal cord and the vesicles of the brain. So if you remember from 430, the telencephalon and myelencephalon structures, that's going to expand in the brain to form that area, and the rest of the body wall is going to form the central canal of the spinal cord. Okay? Then here we see this continue to split. Now we're starting to do some longitudinal folding. The edges of the disc are starting to curve forward. And so this muscle here is going to start to form the smooth muscle around the gut, and this muscle is going to form the abdominal wall or chest wall muscle. Back to our disc with its amniotic sac, right? And this is fusing around. The sac here is still here. It's been cut. So you're not seeing it. It pulls around, kind of like I showed you, and now we're seeing the cavity being pulled around as well. So the elongated disc is becoming curved, and that's what you're seeing here. So here's the yolk sac again. This is curving around. Much of the yolk sac will get pinched off and left outside of the embryo, but part of it will fuse here to form the gut, the esophagus, the small intestine. Growing out of the, above the esophagus will be a small bud that will become the trachea. And then it will divide to form bronchi. All of that coming from this primitive gut. This space around here is the ventral cavity. So the thoracic cavity up high, abdominal cavity down low. Once it completely fuses, then we have this arrangement. So parietal, this would be the ventral cavity. Here is the gut. Here are those ridges that develop into the kidneys, the mesonephros, and the ovaries or testes. All right, this would be skeletal muscle out here with skin. This would be smooth muscle with the lining of the gut or the respiratory pathway.
So when babies are born with like their organs outside of their body, is that due to the folding?
Yes. Mm-hmm. There's another step that we won't go into until we get to the digestive system. But at the umbilicus, during embryonic development, the small intestine, which is over 20 feet long in adults, grows so rapidly that it actually goes outside of the developing fetus, rotates, and comes back in again. So So it may be part of that aspect where it didn't come all the way back in again. It's probably a more common cause. It actually goes outside, turns, and then comes back in again. All right, so I have a short video, and then we'll come back and look at this image again. This is week 3 after fertilization. Okay, so it's only been implanted for less than 2 weeks. So this would be at this level here, and then rotated around. So it's a transverse section about where the umbilical cord is. So you can see the 3 layers: ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. Formation of the neurotube that starts to fuse. These are going to form other body wall groups of muscles. So now we're doing that longitudinal folding. Here's the amniotic sac coming around. Here's the skin of the embryo. So we're within an amniotic cavity. Now it's going to do it a little bit higher. So we were here. We're going to do the same thing a little bit higher up near the heart. It's very similar. Our trilaminar disc. These are 2 dorsal arteries that are going to join together to form a single aorta. All right. So this is what we just saw previously. Now the amniotic cavity is entirely around the embryo except for the umbilicus. So it's not showing the longitudinal folding. We're looking at the length of the embryo.
So cool.
Heart, right here. The heart starts to beat right about this time, day 21. It's at the end of the 3rd week.
Wow.
So the heart's the first premature
One that you can tell to see. I mean, everything's going on at the same time, but yeah, as far as functioning, the first organ of function probably would be the. All right, so this is under. I just found this video this morning when I was waiting for my kids to get ready to come to school. It's under trilaminar disc folding. If you want to watch it. So let's go back to that previous image. Because this is as far as we're going to take embryonic development. So this is a transverse section through the embryo, right, through the gut level. So this would be the peritoneal cavity or pleural cavity, depending on what level we're at. This would be skeletal muscle. This would be smooth muscle. Now we haven't really talked about the pleura and the peritoneum much associated with these tissues other than what we first talked about in Bio430. But not only will this tissue, this is for free, not only will this tissue form the smooth muscle and skeletal muscle, but it will form the parietal and visceral membranes. So epithelia is also coming from mesoderm. We tend to think of the epithelia just with the ectoderm. That's just the skin epithelia. The endoderm gives rise to almost all the other epithelia, the lining of the mouth, the lining of the stomach, the lining of the respiratory tract, and so on. But then the mesoderm gives rise to these serous membranes. So it's a kind of all of them will come from an epithelia. So I want you to recognize what would be smooth muscle, what would be skeletal muscle, on this diagram. What would be the lining of the embryonic gut, what would come from the endoderm. Okay. and you have a list, I think 148, am I reading that right? Yeah. Okay, so I've given you some sample structures that would come from each of those three basic types of systems. So obviously, from this point, there's a lot more development that has to occur in the formation of the bones and the individual organs and so on. But having covered to this level of detail, then as we move to the different systems, we'll come back and look at the embryology of each of those systems to a small degree. This is not an embryology class, all right? So just 10 or 12 minutes or so of understanding a little bit of how that organ develops. One of the problems with embryology, the way I took the class, there's two problems. One is typical classic embryology study follows organs. You'll look at the development of the heart. You'll look at the development of the digestive tract. You'll look at the development of the brain. And all the other organs are developing at the same time. So it's hard to get that feel for all the things that are occurring at exactly the same time. The other problem is things change so much. You saw the folding here. When we talk about the heart next week, we have two tubes that join together to form one tube and twist, and what is at the bottom becomes at the top, and what's at the back becomes on the front. Tubes hollow out, walls are formed, new structures are formed, and trying to see that with series of slides. With computer animation, it helps, but not as much as you would think. I guess it's too expensive. You would think it'd be a great help, but the videos just aren't out there to understand, and so looking at slide after slide after slide and trying to visualize 1,000 changes occurring in a couple of days is just mind-boggling. It can make it very fascinating and also very confusing, because not everything is just as simple as the digestive tract. But this gives us at least a little bit of a basis, and was one of the unintended side effects when I decided to put the reproductive system first. Again, classically, look at your textbook, it's the heart, the blood cells, and the heart that go first. 5 or 6 years ago, 10 years ago, I didn't get my order for frozen hearts in time. So I had to change and choose something else. And I chose reproductive. A lot of hormones with reproductive, so I introduced endocrine. But because we've done this level of embryology now, we can look briefly at how each system starts out within the embryo, rather than looking at all of that really fast at the end. So we'll, to some extent, more with some areas, less with other areas, go through this. All right, I want to finish up. This is the end of fertilization, implantation, and development. And now, if you'll turn to the last page of your lecture notes, there's just a bit about contraception.